Today, Paul Manafort has his day in court. This morning, the former Trump campaign chairman will be in a federal courtroom in Virginia as a jury will start to be selected for the bank and tax fraud case against him as that begins. As we speak, the special counsel's team is going head-to-head with defense lawyers in a final pretrial hearing before the first major test of Robert Mueller's 14-month investigation. It centers on Manafort's work as a political consultant in Ukraine and the tens of millions of dollars that he made doing that work and allegedly hid from the IRS. Now, friends tell the New York Times Manafort believes he's innocent, believes he will be acquitted. It is unclear whether he will testify in his own defense. Let's go to the courthouse. Our Joe Johns joins us now in Alexandria, Virginia. Look, this is a final sort of tete-a-tete between both sides before jury selection gets underway. What are you hearing?
Well, that's about it. Jury selection is the main focus of the day here on the Rocket Docket in Alexandria, Virginia. We love to call it that because justice moves so swiftly here. And it's interesting that this is a case that is brought by Robert Mueller, the special counsel investigating interference in the 2016 election. However, we don't expect a lot of conversation about collusion between the campaign, allegedly, and Russia. What we expect to hear more about is bank fraud, tax evasion. What Manafort is essentially accused of is getting tens of millions of dollars from Ukraine and banking it, parking it in offshore foreign banks, and not telling the tax collectors, the Internal Revenue Service. That's what he's up against here. An 18-count indictment with some 30 or more witnesses, almost 3 dozen, could go on for 3 weeks. And frankly, he has another trial scheduled in the District of Columbia later this year. So a lot on the plate for Paul Manafort, the former campaign manager, for Donald Trump. Poppy.
Joe Johns, thank you very much. Our crime and justice reporter Shimon Porcupez is with me. Our legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Shan Wu is also here. I should note, of course, that Shan, you previously represented Rick Gates, a longtime colleague of Paul Manafort, who's now flipped and is cooperating with the government in the case against Manafort. So important perspective from you both. You have a new op-ed, Shan, on CNN.com. Here's the headline: Mueller can't afford to lose the Manafort trial. Why?
I think the stakes are huge for them. It's one thing to get guilty pleas. It's another to undergo the test of fire in court. And I think that's why the pressure is so high on them. It's a challenging case in terms of the technical aspects of it. And they also have to overcome a potentially negative aspect of having so many immunized witnesses. I think were they to lose, that would be a huge blow in terms of the public perception and would be very bad for morale. Substantively, I'm sure they could march on, but I think there's a lot at stake for them.
Shimon, I think it's important for people to understand how this, in many ways, is not connected to President Trump, but is also important for President Trump and his team. I mean, you heard Joe just mention, and the prosecutors have told the judge leading up to this trial, don't expect to hear the word Russia in this case. That's not what it's about. But there is a web, and it is connected. Explain.
Yeah, there is. There is a loan, and prosecutors are going to argue that a loan that Paul Manafort secured from a Chicago bank, that loan, there were some problems with it when he filled out the records that you would, to get these loans. Some of the bank employees had raised some issues with some of what Paul Manafort described in the application for the loan. And the accusation from prosecutors at this trial, and what's important here, this is going to be perhaps maybe the only mention of any connection to the Trump campaign, that
right.
If this bank executive essentially approved this loan under the idea that perhaps he would get a job in the Trump administration. So that's going to be evidence that the prosecutors intend to present. Employees from the bank will testify, but the bank executive actually is not going to testify. And those bank employees are 2 of the 5 witnesses who were immunized, who got immunity from prosecution by the judge. So that certainly is going to be an interesting moment, because perhaps that will be the only mention at this trial of any link to the Trump campaign.
Okay, and Shan, in terms of Manafort himself, we don't know if he will testify in his own defense. And if this actually makes it to trial, I mean, you know, you can have last minute deals. Who knows? They're in these pretrial sort of final meetings. But so many legal experts are pointing to what an uphill battle Manafort faces against these 32 charges. Why do you think that he has refused time and time again to cooperate with the Mueller team and to see this through?
Well, again, not based on the inside information. I think his team has been adamant from the start, as has he, that he intends to fight the charges. I think it is uphill. Any white-collar case is hard because of the amount of documents amassed against them. But as you saw previously in their public filings, they've attacked on a number of fronts, including the civil suit. So they seem pretty dogged in their determination to put Mueller's team to the test here.
Do you think he testifies?
That's a tough call. I would have to handicap it as being negative. I would not put him on if I were his lawyer.
Shimon, let's remind people who the judge is in this case and what he's previously said. His name is Judge Ellis, and he, a few months ago, said point blank to the prosecutors, to Mueller's team, quote, "You don't really care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud. You really care about what information Mr. Manafort can give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump or lead to his prosecution or impeachment or whatever." That's significant, but he hasn't always swung their way so far in these pretrial hearings and motions.
No, in fact, Poppy, you know, President Trump, used those words in a speech at a rally, you know, sort of thinking perhaps that the judge would side his way. Those words, you know, at the time certainly did make news, and that was something that the defense team was hoping they would get perhaps a dismissal on some of the counts, or perhaps some of the decisions would go their way. But no, he hasn't. Look, this judge is known to speak his mind. He's been around a long time. He's very well known, certainly in the district. And you know, he just moves things along. So just because he may have this opinion of what the prosecution here may be ultimately, and the special counsel may be ultimately trying to do, the law is the law. And it seems like, at least from everything we know now, that he's going to side with the law, despite what some in the public think, despite what the president thinks, and perhaps, you know, what's obvious here, and what many have been saying all along, is that this was about putting pressure on Paul Manafort to cooperate. I mean, there's a ton of evidence in this case against Paul Manafort. It's true, this isn't perhaps going to be the most exciting trial in the world because it's going to rely heavily on documents, on financial evidence, FBI agents, other witnesses. There will be some interesting tidbits, of course, because we're going to be talking about some of the Paul Manafort's lavish lifestyle and over $800,000 that he paid a tailor for suits, and some of his landscaping and real estate. So you're going to have some color in that way. But, you know, generally this is a very good case for the prosecution, and it is hard to believe that Paul Manafort hasn't had any kind of plea negotiations or tried to plead guilty in this case.
Look, he still could. It could go up to the last minute. Really quickly, Shan, you write the 800-pound gorilla in the room will be President Trump. Why?
Because both sides are very careful about that. They're trying not to mention Russia. I've understood that government witnesses have been told to stay away from that topic, to stay away from Trump. Obviously, the judge will be very concerned about keeping this pristine. He doesn't want there to be some argument later, if there's a conviction, that the case was tainted through references to Russia or to Trump.
Thank you both, Shan Wu, Shimon. Appreciate it.